Hello, credit union community. Here are your topics for today's show. First up, you can outsource your technology to a fintech partner, but who's actually on the hook when the vendor relationship goes wrong? Next up, 93% of organizations now fear third-party access is a backdoor into their network. So why do credit unions keep treating one-off VPNs and firewall exceptions as harmless? And finally, when the NCUA examiner says, "Show me," can your credit union actually prove every vendor connection is vetted, approved, and monitored? Welcome to Grow Your Credit Union, where credit union leaders come together, challenge old thinking, explore fresh ideas, and present solutions to industry obstacles. I am your host, Joshua Barkley. Before we begin today's show, I want to first mention our sponsor, Pure IT. They've helped over 170 170, it's a lot of credit unions. They've helped them navigate technology with assessments, strategic advising, and managed IT services. You will learn more about Pure IT later in the show. Friendly reminder to all of you listening, if there is a topic you think we should cover on Grow Your Credit Union, send it to info@growyourcreditunion.com. If it's a fit for the show, we'll cover your topic in a future episode. Let's kick things off. Joining me today as my lovely guest is Trent Henson, CIO at Pure IT. Trent, what's going on, my man?
Not a whole lot.
And joining me today, he's an old friend. I think I interviewed him 3 years ago, which feels like 30 years ago. He is my guest co-host today, Kyle Stutzman, SVP of Product Strategy at Connective. Kyle, it's been a long time, my good man. How are you?
It's great to see you. I'm doing well. Yeah, it's nice to be back. It's nice to have some conversations and talk about the industry again.
Credit unions, they want to move faster, members expect better digital experiences, and fintech partnerships are one of the fastest ways to deliver on that. But this creates a real leadership challenge, fellows, and it isn't talked about nearly enough. Because when you implement a fintech vendor, you might outsource the technology, you might outsource part of the process, but you do not outsource the responsibility. The credit union is still on the hook for safety, soundness, and member data. I found this old statement the NCUA issued to credit unions back in October of 2007, and I quote, "Credit unions are responsible for safeguarding member assets and ensuring sound operations irrespective of whether or not a third party is involved," end quote. Trent, let's kick things off with you. As credit unions pursue more fintech partnerships, how should leadership think about balancing innovation with governance, accountability, and risk ownership?
That's a good question. And your quote kind of leads into the problem. It says you need to do this, but it gives no indication of how to do it. And that's really the problem. Many of the credit unions think they're very secure, their connections are rock solid, because someone told them that. Or maybe they just assumed that, but they never think of that as a real problem. So if you don't know about it, you don't know to fix it or correct it or make it better. So I think that's really what's going on with credit unions. And it's a bigger problem than most of them think, which is probably why we're having this conversation.
You mentioned, Trent, the how. Most people talk about the importance of all of this, but there's no mention of the how. Kyle, I'm going to put you on the spot. Talk to me about how you go about juggling all of these things, the governance, the risk, all of that, because no one really talks about how.
Well, it's not a one-person job. Let's start there. I mean, with all of our credit unions and all the clients and personal experience, everyone, looks either to the compliance officer or the security officer or the IT leader. It's really a much larger governance issue and conversation. Vendor due diligence in itself is quite broad, but the whole program has to really come together if you're going to address this one area. And I think we're now talking more of those connectivity and the connections in. So at that point, you have to have someone that both understands the business risk, how to quantify that risk, understands even the culture and perspective. You mentioned fintech specifically. New fintechs are very good at technology. That doesn't mean they're very good at our credit union financial business or our regulations or knowing what has to be protected. They're good at connection and making things move. And so often there's some cultural mismatch, there is some expectations mismatch. And so it's really coming at this from a very holistic approach, saying, I know we have some security standards, I know we have some technology standards. With a fintech, you almost have to also educate why we're going around this path and why it's so important and what kind of visibility and transparency needs to be there in order to meet those regulatory questions when they come in, as well as real security.
Kyle said, something, Trent, that I want to kick over to you, which is that a lot of credit unions don't know how to quantify the risk. And to give a little bit more of a picture of that, we had on Mike Valentine, who is the president and CEO of BCU, and he said he has maybe 250 vendors. And I know Becky Reed, a friend of yours, obviously, co-host of the show on most days, she's seen credit unions with, 300 plus vendors. So to you, Trent, when you go in and you work with a lot of these credit unions, have they even quantified the risk? How do you do that with 100 different tentacles or 300 tentacles coming out of your systems?
Well, that's a good question too. They think they've quantified the risk, but again, it's based on level of knowledge and understanding of what the real risk is. So where they think they have a VPN, for example, they just assume because virtual private network VPN, that somehow includes all the encryption, all of the logging, maybe some alerts if something goes awry. And no one is lying to them. That's just an assumption. And that's the one they go with. So when you have hundreds of vendors and probably a percentage of them need to connect to you, specifically your core, you let them because you want whatever it is they have. That's why they're a vendor. So the bottom line is there is risk. There is monumental risk for some of these things, and it's just not well understood.
It's just true. There's risk there. And we often think of it, and I know Trent and PRIT's perspective at that network layer. With Connect's perspective, I'll add on that we also think at it at an API layer. I mean, there is both the network and the routing, and then there's the application traffic. And you start to put all these layers of networking and communication together, and you wonder who is validating those items. So we're often having internal teams or even external teams managing our connectivity in credit unions to understand what should be routed across, what should be allowed. Go back to a quick story. When I was in an institution responsible for directly managing these connections at a credit union, and I remember the first vendor we ran into, and they said, I can't get out of your network. And I'm like, that's right. You never asked to get out of my network. Why would you think you should? And they're like, this is the first institution we've been in that we weren't just able to go out of the network into the internet and do whatever we wanted. And I see Trent laughing. I mean, this was 15 some years ago, the default security of like, no, I should know what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you should go, wasn't ingrained back then. And I still think it's a very broad approach of us having the visibility and the controls in place in the way that we really need to when it talks about the API and the network connections to enable the third parties that we do depend on. They are very important. This is not a conversation about not using them. It's a conversation about how do we make sure we have that governance and visibility to make sure it's safe to use them.
Every custom VPN tunnel, every temporary firewall exception, every ad hoc vendor connection is a door into the credit union's network. Individually, each of these things feels harmless and urgent. A vendor needs access today, so someone opens a path, right? So there's a lot of this going on right now, Trent, within credit unions. And from an executive and board perspective, help me understand, why are these one-off connectivity decisions often problematic?
Well, I think the direct answer to your question is the board just wants to hear we're secure, we're safe, we're making our members happy, we're servicing our members. They don't really ask, how are we safe? They do the what and not the how. And that's just how boards work. There's not enough time. And if you put a packet together, someone in IT maybe covering all those options, send it to the board. I'm sad to say that most of it is either not read or just simply not understood because the IT group is writing in a very technical language. The board is like probably you and me, and they want to speak human. So there's a disconnect in the documentation that they read to approve something. And I think that's the basis of the problem. If they knew, and I'll give you one example. I was at a credit union that had a VPN going to a call center provider. They were satisfied with the VPN, not the strength of it. They just said, oh, it's a VPN, it's secure. Well, we were there doing an assessment. One of the assessment things is we listened to the noise on the wire, the network, and we picked up every conversation that the credit union had. So too many times that happens, and no one intended for that to happen. They just didn't understand the how that went with their what.
Kyle, yeah, that's first of all, Trent, you've got all those juicy, scary stories about how a lot of this stuff's not protected as well as it should be, and people are not aware. I think the people not being aware is a little scarier to me than the vulnerability itself, oftentimes. Kyle, Trent said something that really stood out to me, which is let's put aside the technological risk and talk a little bit about what you're seeing with communication. Because Trent mentioned that the board, this is not being communicated and documented properly. And would you kind of agree with Trent in terms of your experience going into credit unions? Is that one of the big failures of these one-off systems? They're problematic in and of themselves, but the lack of documentation and communication, would you say that's also massively a problem?
Yeah, I mean, you state that well. It almost starts with the problem of just our internal communication. I mean, we have technical people in credit unions that are managing this, or a third party that's helping to manage security and communication, networking communication. But you're also communicating to an executive team and a board that probably isn't technical. And if they do have someone technical, it may be one person who everyone looks to on the board. And anytime there's a technical software or networking question, they all turn to the left and look at the one person to say, are we good? So it's not just a documentation and communication, but it's also how we document and communicate to a level that a business owner can understand, a business executive can understand. And that to me goes back to some basics of even understanding how we're set up today. What is our underlying way that we communicate and interact with third parties? And we don't have to get technical to have that conversation, but it could be a simple diagram that's like, we used to have one firewall, meaning that everything we did went through one place. And we knew that I think people like to use houses, we knew if the front door of our house was locked, that we were really secure. But we don't live in a house with only one door anymore. We live in a house where every door, window, the chimney, there are so many places that people are connected and data's going in and out that we are taking a different approach. And sometimes having even some stories to help educate from a non-technical perspective helps everyone to kind of have a better view of what we're working with. And then to your point, you do need real documentation and you need to know real standards. And those can be communicated, but now you've at least given some base for people to work with. And I'd say that both are missing in a lot of institutions. You don't have the documentation, or you just have the documentation, then you don't have the context and the understanding that a business person can understand.
I think a lot of times, even when there is documentation, it's dated 5 years ago. So the concept, we documented it once and we're good, simply doesn't work. Technology moves in dog years. It's very fast. So that documentation for 5 years ago, it's way out of date.
Kyle, you said the difficulty with communicating to board members. A lot of executives probably aren't technical. I mean, it depends on which role they happen to be in. For you, Trent, do you feel like you have a major challenge with communicating these things to credit union leaders? And how do you make it easier for them to understand?
Me personally, I don't feel I have a challenge at all because a long time ago, and I've been in this business, this career for 38 years. So I've been here, we can tell by all the white, I've been here a while. I've learned to transition from geek speak and technobabble to, like I said earlier, human. And I know how to talk to the board. I know how to talk to executives in terms that mean something to them. Telling someone, oh, you have a TCP/IP vulnerability on port, they have no idea. Their eyes will glaze over. I speak to them in a normal language. Unfortunately, not all IT people have grown to the level to do that yet. I'm hopeful yet. So there's a disconnect in how they communicate.
Well said. Well said. Kyle, anything that you want to add there?
No, I think that's a great thing. You just talked about individual connections. I think the idea of individual connections also one thing that is helpful for business. It's not just security. It is about speed. So just quickly setting up a connection may get something working temporarily, but that's not sustainable and that doesn't really provide the business value. And so I think going back to talk about doing things in a standard documented way that everyone knows and someone can pick up. I don't know how many times I've been part of an institution or worked with an institution and there's staff turnover. It just happens, right? And the one person who knew how something was set up or who had that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in our credit union industry, 30 years of experience and knew everything, and they're not there anymore. It's really important to not just have the documentation, but know how we do things, why we do them. And that makes things still sustainable depending on where you're at, because things do change, but our approach is always the same. That also can help, I think, leadership teams understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And isn't have to be a barrier to speed. It actually can be part of our speed and scale.
It always ends up, or most of the time ends up with the replacement person, whoever stepped up. The answer is, oh, well, that's how John Doe did it. We'll just keep doing it that way. That's part of the problem.
How well do you know your vendors, folks? When an NCUA examiner sits down, the question is not, do you trust your vendor? The question is, show me. Show me that you understand the risk before you sign the agreement. Show me that someone approved the connection. Show me that you know what access the vendor has, what data they can touch, how that access is monitored, and who owns the decision if something goes wrong. So you both know this, but examiners are not grading you on trust. They are grading you on evidence. And this is probably my favorite question of this entire episode. Trent, what kind of documentation, oversight, and evidence should credit union leaders expect to have in place to confidently defend third-party connectivity decisions?
They should have documented and signed by more than one person all of their connectivity. Where do they come from? Where is it connecting to? What rules does it have to pass through the firewall to get there? How strong is the encryption? All this can be simply put on one page and kept up to date. When the encryption changes, when whatever they need to connect to changes, we need to know who changed it. We need to know when it changed. We need to have logs before and after, because if we have to track down something suspicious, we need to know if it happened after whatever the change was. It's not very hard to do, but unfortunately, like earlier, it's a lack of understanding. I will say that an examiner probably doesn't know that either. He just wants to see documentation that has a couple of high points on it. And that's where there's a lot of confusion entered. Some examiners are well trained and they've actually had IT training. Many have a cursory level of understanding. So they want to see your evidence sheet for that connection. And if it has the vendor's name and that it's connecting to the core and someone signed it, that's probably okay. Another examiner may say, oh no, I need to know a lot more, because at the end of the day, they're connecting to your core where financial transactions happen, and the NCUA doesn't want to cover some huge cost because of a breach. They want to protect the money.
Kyle, I'm going to pass this over to you. Same exact question. I'm a credit union leader. The examiners are coming. You have to help me gather evidence that proves that I am aware of the connectivity issues and I'm aware of my third-party vendors. What do I need? They're coming. What do I got to do?
Unfortunately, the first answer is often they're not coming tomorrow, right? I mean, I need 2 weeks to help you out. That's the scary part of I think the reality throughout our institutions is that it's I'm going to have to go pull this information from so many places, or give you the binder of things that were put together. And there's centralized security tools, SIMSOC sort of solutions that can gather some of this data if you're all feeding it to the right place. But Trent said it well about just a simple standard place where you're seeing a single form. But I don't personally think that it's best for that to be considered manually updated, right? If it's manual process, and in today's world, it's probably not going to be something that stays up to date and isn't up to date. But our systems today and the data sets are available to us that we should be having those things at our fingertips. If it's not a dashboard, if it's not automatically created for us, it's an automatic extract that can be done and put in front of everyone. Because I know the examiner's coming and I know that's important. But if I'm measuring my success by passing the examiners, who probably isn't the most experienced and probably had anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months of training on the IT security side of things, maybe he or she is much more experienced. But in general, they're not really the standard to know that, oh, what I really want to protect is the trust of my members. What I really want to protect is their private information. It's that I need these things all the time. And so you coming to me and needing to ask for that, and me saying, I'm going to need 2+ weeks to get it to you, is a red flag, is a concern. Like, I need to be able to have that and give it to you and to say, here's where I know all the connections are, which ones we decommissioned or which ones haven't had traffic. And so we turned them off. It's just, we have to really move to automation. And we have not just traditional tools and machine learning, but AI components that also help us gather and put these together if the solution we have doesn't offer it. But many solutions are getting to the point where they can give you that information. They can say, here's all the connections we have, and you're not spending the time on it. You actually get to spend the time on the important things, which is taking the next steps to secure something, to address a potential issue, not on gathering data just to meet an exam.
Trent, I kind of want to move a little bit with this topic, shift it just ever so slightly, and just kind of mention that you've been in the space, both of you, much longer than myself. I've been around for 5 years, but I've seen in 5 years this shift between nobody talking about IT and cybersecurity to now all of a sudden you guys have become very sexy in the last 2 years in terms of publications writing about issues related to cybersecurity and so forth. So I'm wondering if both of you are seeing, we'll start with you, Trent, are you seeing more interest in these topics because of the AI deepfakes, the increased threats that are happening, all of this type of stuff? Do you think that has something to do with why you guys are now the sexy boys in town?
I think it has a lot to do with it. Publications, TV, commercials, things that make the news cycle get people's attention. And deep fakes got a lot of people's attention. Even voice impersonation. AI can sound like a human, not just any human. It can sound like me or you. So people see this in the news and they get really concerned about how can I protect my credit union and, more importantly, my members from that kind of thing. So I think it's at a flashpoint right now, and it's not just a flash. It's been for the last couple of years, and it's continuing to grow. Steve Coyne on our side, CISO, he always says that we, as the people helping the credit union or the credit union, have to be right 100% of the time with security, and the bad guys only need to be right once. So that kind of puts it into perspective.
Wow, yeah, that does put it into perspective. And Kyle, thoughts there?
To follow that's difficult, Josh. But we have the AI component to also thank for some of the interest, because that being right once, now we have additional, more intelligent bots and tools scanning for problems, for issues. It's not just the person impersonating a person, impersonating a voice, but there's other risk, especially at the system and vulnerability side. So there's some interesting approach of consolidating connections, because consolidating to trusted standards does let you have a better observability. So we see it on the API side. We see institutions wanting to own more of their connectivity with a partner or directly, so they know that they're getting the right standards and not just relying on a third party in order to do individual ones. And like you said, have hundreds potentially of vendors. The other side is it's not just VPNs. There are web-based connections. There are other data channels of data exchanges. And we've had batch files in our industry forever. Going to real-time APIs, we think is a step forward as far as not having PII data sitting around or in potential data stores that are known and secured. You said earlier about knowing your data. So all these factors are just, people are much more aware of them, even at a board level, at an executive level, and then especially, when it's the IT group or others. And now you have members, and I think that's probably the point Trent was making strongly. You see something in the news, you realize that this is very concerning, and you wonder, can I trust my institution? And that's one of the values we have as a credit union is trust. And we want to make sure we maintain that for all our members.
Guys, we talked about a lot of things today, but really it comes down to credit unions with a lot of different vendors, a lot of different systems, a lot of different connections, a lot of vulnerabilities. Pure IT does have a solution called Pure Guardian. Trent, I want to kick things off with you. It's a really cool name, but what is Pure Guardian?
What is Pure Guardian? Well, to make it very simple, it's a device that the credit union can put on their side that doesn't take any of their knowledge to configure. Anybody can plug it in, and it connects them to one or more fintechs securely. You hear that a lot, and that was part of this conversation. Oh, it's secure. I'm happy. I'm good. So because we have been asked to help so many credit unions with connectivity, one side, the vendor controls their side of it, credit union controls their side, fingers are always pointing at whose problem it is. We developed this product simply because everyone was having this problem. And we decided to put into it all the things that an examiner needs, that the board wants, the risk team sees. So a simple attestation report in English that everyone can understand can be generated at any time they want. And it's digitally signed. What that means is they can prove that the report they have in their hand is the same report that was issued when it first came out. So now we know no one has tampered with it, no one has changed anything, and we maintain chain of custody for that information. There's a lot more to it, but to make it simple, credit union can use it to bring in fintechs safely.
But that documentation piece now, you kind of defend me from the examiner a little bit, no?
I do, and we even have the ability for the examiner to log in directly for each credit union and look at anything they want. It's read-only, it's safe, but they can run the reports. They can look at attestation for 2 years ago if they want. So we made it so the examiners would be happy.
Kyle, something that comes to mind with what Trent said about Pure Guardian, there's a couple phrases in the industry that you've heard them so many times, they make you a little sick. I got to talk about them with my therapist. I'm tired of talking about it, but time to value. When I think about all the vendors and I think about all the credit unions, we need time to value, time to value. Something like Pure Guardian is really helping with time to value, no? Because it seems like we could get up and running way quicker, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add in here from a connective perspective. And before I was with Janesy, a founder and CEO of Janesy, and that came, out of some Pure IT discussions and movement and launching. Anyway, the point here is we were doing hundreds of connections. How do we have a way to know that we're trusted? We tried with some independent standard firewall devices and such before. And the challenge goes back to a whole layered items of issues, but one of them is the supply chain. One of the things we repeatedly get is how do you protect from supply chain concerns while also, to your point, time to value of being able to scale for at least one institution, but also for hundreds of institutions. And so we were looking for a solution, had gone, and Trent was developing this. We were early adopters of it at the time. And this is the solution that you know from ground up, the firmware, the software, everything's on it. So you know that layer of accountability and the supply chain is tracked and known. You also know exactly how the deployment happens in a way that is sustainable, repeatable, and as he said, auditable. So you see all these components. So you're able to take basically like a web form, fill in the information. We're happy with the idea. Doesn't it also have IP address conflicts, all this stuff? This is designed for the industry. And so it's a way when we're talking hundreds now, but we're now moving towards the thousands. We have a couple partners that are working with so many credit unions and some community banks, which we'll leave off to the side, but so many credit unions that they need to have a solution that you can go and put in and you're working on it within days or a week, not 2 months, and not struggling through it. And I say that because it's not, the speed to value isn't just about that design. It's also about, and the reporting, there's visibility during installation. So one of the biggest challenges when you go to do a new connection is why isn't it working? If that question gets asked, that's like a death toll to an implementation timeline because everyone has to dive in to try to figure out why. And so one of the strong and important things that we saw in Pure Guardian is they're able to capture information right at the edge of the device that's also talking to the credit union. And so within a short period of time, the same kinds of things they do in assessments, but just in a microcosm, they're capturing that information to say, we see information going here, but not coming back, or we see information going there, but coming back from a different place. Now, that may indicate a major problem or a minor problem, but what it does say is we know where the problem is. They know whether the fintech or us, Connective in this case, is actually communicating all the way through, getting to the device and getting into the next hop, or they know whether the institution. So long-winded to say, there is that visibility is so much more important than just security. It's also in that speed to value implementation and being able to handle either hundreds of credit unions or hundreds of fintechs and still be able to manage it and have that visibility.
Beautiful. That brings us to the end of the show. Trent, this is the part of the show where we give our final thoughts or plugs or anything that's on your mind. Hopefully it's credit union related.
For me, it's simply letting all the credit unions know that we're here to help. We are part of the industry. We are a QSO, so you know what that means. And I'm happy to help anybody. Since I'm not a sales guy, I go in to solve problems. I don't worry about all the other parts. We have other people that do that. So I'm just there to help, to make things better, increase your membership, keep that trust, and hopefully lower the average age of member. We want to get young people coming in, not just people my age.
And Trent, if anybody wants to get in touch with you that is listening, what is the best way to go about that?
pureitqso.com. All the information to reach any of us is on that site.
Kyle, final thoughts. Give them to me.
I think just with Pure IT, Trent on the phone, Connective, the focus is the credit union space. This community banking that we do for the communities that we get to be part of, even though it's the directly institutions do it, is so important that these kind of conversations are not about the scary risk other side of it. It's about improving and making sure that everyone has the resources they need. I think that's the fun driver as I hear, talk with Pure IT as a partner, as I have conversations inside Connective, as you're doing Grow Your Credit Union podcast. And it's just that these are important things. And we believe that this industry and this whole country needs credit unions, and they need this community banking to be alive and well. And the better that we partner together and do that, which means you'll have external connections. They are an important part of our ecosystem too. It's a thank you to Pure IT. It's a thank you to Connective. It's a thank you to you for doing these items. I think everyone's here with the rally cry of we want stronger and healthier and growing institutions that are secure for many decades to come.
And Kyle, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how should they do so?
Yeah, connective.io with a K. That's the best way to do that. Reach out, and happy to respond to any questions or comments and see if I can be of assistance to anyone.
Trent, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Kyle, as always, want to thank you. I want to thank our sponsor, Pure IT. Go check them out by visiting pureitqso.com. There you can learn more about Pure Guardian, which we discussed on the show. And I want to give a special thanks to our listeners for continuing to support and listen to another episode of Grow Your Credit Union. If you like the show, follow us on your podcast player of choice. If you want to be a guest or would like to talk about sponsorship opportunities, head to growyourcreditunion.com to learn more. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.